Hi, I'm Katie, and I love cold plunges not for the cold itself, but how clear and present I feel afterwards. Over the past few years, I've optimized my cold plunge solution, and I want to give you an overview of how I approached it. It's very low tech, no power tools required. I have separate videos on making a rigid cover for the 100-gallon Rubbermaid stock tank, which you could use for any stock tank, and on insulating the aforementioned stock tank. So I won't go into that, but I'll focus on the rest of the setup. I opted for a chest freezer, and I keep a cover over it for a little bit of weather protection. I'm in San Diego, so we don't have harsh weather, but I wanted the little extra support. The funny looking thing on top is so water runs off the cover instead of pooling, and I built a little bit of a cage around it to support the cover so that it would not press up against the sides and again give a little bit of extra protection but also airflow. For ice, I use plastic containers to freeze large blocks, and then I float the containers in the water in the tub, and when it melts a little bit, the block will tip out really easily, and then I can scoop up the water into the container, put the lid back on, and put it back in the freezer. It usually takes about 5 minutes for the ice to melt enough so that I can dump it out, so sometimes I make 2 trips. But the nice thing is there's no water loss in the process, and I was strategic about choosing plastic containers of a size so that my hands can slide down and hold them securely when I'm returning them to the chest freezer. When you shop for freezers, you'll get better results with a top opening model than a front opening one because of the thermodynamics. I recommend looking for an Energy Star rating. I don't know the exact rating matters as much, but a lot of thinner walled options are available on Amazon, and those just will run up your electric bill more. I ended up getting my chest freezer at Best Buy, and I'll put the one I grabbed in the notes. As far as temperature, in San Diego with ice changes every day or every other day, I put in 3 or 4 blocks of ice. Even in the hottest summer, it isn't too hard to keep the plunge around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. I think 45 degrees would also be doable. If you want colder than that, you may want to get a larger chest freezer unless you live in a really cold climate, or you may size up if you live in a really hot climate. I find I get plenty of results without needing to go down to the near freezing level of temperature. The cool thing about my nifty self-designed insulation solution is that it's much easier to keep the plunge cold. I really noticed a difference after I made that upgrade, and I float a spa blanket on top. I also use a pop-up tent over the tub for privacy. Unfortunately, I don't think they have the exact model I use, but some version of this is great. I use it so I don't flash the neighbors and I don't have to deal with a swimsuit, and I can be in and out and back to my day really quickly, which is very supportive. My cold plunge is right next to my hot tub, but I space out using them. If I use the cold plunge late at night, I tend to be too wired to sleep. I use the plunge a lot to clear brain fog and to elevate my mood, which I love how quick and efficient it is. I keep a small timer out in the area because time gets very subjective in very cold water. I like to use it for 3 to 5 minutes. I've also had a good experience with neoprene booties that cover the front of the foot. The heel doesn't need it as much, but as I've started to drop down into colder temps, I found my feet could really ache. And when I go in, I keep my head and hands above water. These parts of the body react more intensely to cold, and everything I've read says you don't need to dunk your whole self in order to get the results we're after. To keep the water nice, I add a very small amount of chlorine, and I use a mineral stick. I'm not sure how much the stick helps, but it's in there. When I want to change the water, I use a siphon to drain most of it, then tip the tank over to get the last bit, and then hose it out. I also use the siphon as a vacuum if I've tracked in a little bit of dirt. I haven't noticed a significant increase in my electric bill from running the chest freezer. It seems pretty economical. I don't know how chillers compare, but I didn't want the complexity of plumbing. Also, I don't have power tools or a strong do-it-yourself skill set, so I chose a low-tech solution. There's a little bit of tending involved, walking out, tossing in the ice, scooping the water back into the containers, restoring them to the freezer. But it's short, and I enjoy the excuse to take a quick movement break, so this has been a great match for me.